Good morning, everyone. My name is Chris Ng. On behalf of the U of T Buddhist Contemplative Care Society, I'd like to welcome all of you today to this event, a day of learning and sharing for multi-faith prison chaplaincy. We're indeed very grateful for all our speakers who have accepted our invitation to join us today. And I have known Roshi Taigen Henderson over here for quite some years. And a couple months ago, we sat down over lunch and we chatted about prison chaplaincy. I felt that there's an urgent need for people working in the field to connect, to network, and to support and to share their experiences. So this is how this event came about at first. And then also, as you know, there's a Buddhist stream in the Master of Pastoral Studies program here at Emmanuel College since 2015. And there's also a sense among us, I'm also a student here, that we don't know too much about prison chaplaincy, so we thought that this would be an event where we would learn more about prison chaplaincy. In the event, some of us might want to consider that as a career choice. And I'd also like to let you know we are very grateful to Emmanuel, who had offered to videotape this presentation, today's events for us. And he would be only taping the presenters who had given consent to the videotaping, so he won't be taping the audience just in case some people are concerned not to be on the video. And we would like to post the video recording on our website for people who would have liked to come and couldn't join us today, so they could watch it later. And so, yeah. And without talking too much more, I'd like to introduce to you Roshi Taigen Henderson. He's the abbot of the Toronto Zen Center located near High Park. And the center is under the direction of Roshi Sunyata Gra, who is the abbot of the Vermont Zen Center and the Dharma heir of Roshi Kaplo. I guess many of you would have heard of Roshi Kaplo, the author of the Three Pillars of Zen. So Roshi Taigen was ordained by Roshi Graf as a priest in 2004 and sanctioned as Roshi Graf's first Dharma heir in June of 2005. He was installed as the abbot of the Toronto Zen Center at the same time. So Roshi's interest in prison work began in 2004 by writing to Calvin Ballone, an American inmate and author of Prison Wired Dharma. Later, this developed into volunteer prison work in provincial prisons with the Freeing the Human Spirit around 2008. And he was later hired by the first contractor for chaplaincy, Cairo Newman. When Bridges of Canada won the contract, he was hired as Buddhist chaplain in Warkworth and Beaver Creek institutions. Please join me in welcoming Roshi Taigen. Thank you.
I don't know, is it better if I use this or not use this?
Recording.
Yeah.
Better? Oh, recording, thank you. So, thank you, Chris. As Chris said,
Could you hold it closer, please? Can't hear you.
Closer like this? Okay.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Chris, I'm not used to speaking in these. So Chris organized this a phenomenal event, and she asked me to moderate. I'm not sure what I'm moderating, except that we want to explore the challenges of multi-faith chaplains in the system, whether in institutional system. The John Finellis, who used to be a prison chaplain, is now working at CFB Trenton, and also Paula, who works in the Paula Osmok, is that the way to put it? Who's the executive director of John Howard Society. This is, where a lot of prisoners, they house prisoners after they leave the prison. The reason I'm really interested in multi-faith chaplaincy, and I think this is a great program, is that it's a kind of a template or a fractal, you could say, of what's happening in North America, what's happening in the world. And I think it's really important that we find out how we can relate to each other and how we can, through our institutions. And the institutions have a lot of old power, and how that can change for the better and help all of us if it changes properly. So this kind of cross-fertilization of ideas and knowledge, I think, will really help that process. And of course, hopefully, people will talk about this to other people, because that's really how the word gets out about what's going on, you know, whether it's in this institution or that institution, and what could be helpful. And then that, in turn, can maybe make the changes. But anyway, I'm very interested in what Paula has to say, so without further ado, just to say that she's got a tremendous amount of experience in the John Howard Society and in this field. Paula?
Good morning, everyone. As John said, my name is Paula Osmok. I'm the Executive Director of the John Howard Society of Ontario. And I'll tell you just very quickly a little bit about us. Most of you know us by our work in the prison system, and certainly that's where our roots are. And while we're very proud of that work, we do a lot more. We have 19 local offices throughout Ontario, and we are across Canada. And our local services to individuals who are either at risk of entering the criminal justice system, so the prevention end of the work, the early and mid-intervention work, people who are involved in the system, and the reintegration piece of it, so people who are returning from prisons, coming back out into the community. Those individuals all receive supports from our local offices. I work at the provincial office, and our work is more supporting those local offices, so program development, research, and policy work. And we also do the back office supports by way of pension and benefits and the things that we really don't have to talk about. The context for today, I really didn't know the audience very well, but I thought it might be helpful to set a bit of context and talk to you a little bit about perhaps more the prison system than the criminal justice system, but maybe set the tone for some of the things you're going to hear throughout the day. And I'm very informal in terms of presenting, so if you have any questions, don't save until the end. Please let me know. I'm happy to shift gears and answer anything that might come up throughout. I need my glasses for this, so I'm going to be putting the back on. I'm going to assume that not everybody understands that Canada has a very different system than others. Our system is split federally and provincially. And so the definition of that, or the defining demarcation, is that it's done by sentence. So individuals that have a sentence by the courts of 2 years or more find their way into the federal system. Those that are 2 years less a day and under go into the provincial system. And the only difference is that the provincial system is sort of the gateway to move into the federal. So people who are awaiting trial, who haven't granted bail, or who are awaiting sentencing or classification to go into whichever federal prison may be best suited, will also be housed in the provincial system. The provincial system also has become the home for a significant number of immigration holds, which is another area that I'm sure many of you follow press about. People who are detained for unusually long periods of time, often without charges. And we just now are seeing some solutions that the Border Services Organization is working to implement so that they can at least be released on a bail-type release and have some ability to be in the community and find some support. So that's a whole other area of services. The responsibilities are here. Federally, it's Correctional Services Canada. You know them by CSC, and John's going to be telling you tons about those. And provincial institutions, responsibility of, it's now called Ministry of Solicitor General. So that has changed. And I'm going to talk a little bit about their broader responsibilities later on because it's a little bit unusual. Oops, did I get you there? This is just a quick snapshot, a very rough map of where the provincial facilities are in Ontario. Obviously, they're clustered where the population is. But there certainly are some in the north. There still are a couple of small community jails. We went through a transformation in the 90s where a lot of the community jails were closed and they started to operate American-style mega jails. And we have 3, I guess, in total in Ontario. Central North, which is in Penetang and in that Muskoka region, Central East, which is in Lindsay for the East region, and then Maplehurst in Milton, which covers sort of the more urban areas of the province. And those are, it's an interesting discussion just to look at those and see how they're set up in the pods and just how many people are crammed into an institution, because they're designed for, and probably house 1,200 and up. I don't know the current populations, but they're also designed, the watermarks on the plans show pods can just be added as long as the property permits. They can become huge facilities. So these are interesting numbers to get a sense of the incarceration rates in our province. Our rate, which is a combined average rate across Canada, is 136 per 100,000. That puts us well down the list in terms of comparisons to some of the other countries, Russia, for example, and many of the countries where the justice systems are perhaps not quite the same as ours, higher. US, of course, is quite a bit higher than us. But we still are higher than some of the Scandinavian countries and some of the others that have a lot more in the way of alternatives and community-based solutions. I want to distinguish between the populations. I don't think I have it on here, but generally in terms of a snapshot, in Ontario, in our provincial facilities, we probably house at any given time between 7,000 and 8,000 individuals. So if you take a look at the admissions coming into the provincial institutions, this is a 2016-2017 stat, and usually the stats are published about a year behind. There's well over 100,000 admissions. So that gives you a sense that at any given time, you have 7,000 to 8,000 in the institutions. There's quite an active cycle going on of people coming in and going out to reach that kind of a number. And that's going to be of interest as we start to talk about healthcare issues in the institutions and the implications to our community. There's obviously some disproportionalities in terms of Aboriginal populations, and that is consistent with the criminal justice system broadly, provincial institutions and federal institutions. We see that for all the racialized populations, and you could go online and look at those stats. They're very disturbing. There's some youth numbers there. Our youth numbers are going down. I don't know offhand how that compares province to province and territory, but we certainly have seen a lot of the numbers in our closed custody facilities drop, and again, more use of community alternatives, and I think that's based on the understanding in our research that sometimes the best intervention and the most successful intervention with youth is no intervention. So sometimes criminalizing their behaviors can actually have an adverse effect. Again, some stats. Obviously, the prison populations are predominantly male, and they're aging. I'll talk a little bit about that later on too. So in our work, I mentioned my office is very focused on research policy work. These are the priority areas that we've defined in our plan this past couple of years and this year currently as well. And I'm going to chat a little bit about each of those, but they'll come out in terms of the needs that will be of interest to you and the work that you're hoping to do. So bail is an area we've done some research on. We've been very successful working with the past provincial government on some changes in that regard. And those are changes that will make a difference in terms of numbers inside, and I think in integrating people more successfully in the community. Focusing on health and mental illness, and reintegration, again, that may be an area of particular interest to you, and police records, which is certainly a problem. So bail and remand, I mentioned, and this is for someone who has been arrested, detained, and they make application for bail to be released in the community awaiting trial. And at one point in time, as we started to make observations around the population that was released on bail, which wasn't very high, we noticed that the JPs and the courts were checking every single box of the conditions on the bail release form. So, for example, someone who may have committed a robbery, you'll see check marks beside conditions that speak to use of alcohol, association with people, and they had nothing at all to do with the offense. And what we found is that the charges, administrative charges for breaches, were quite high, and these these were not conditions that were relevant to them. So we really felt it was setting them up for failure. So we took a closer look, found that actually that was the case in terms of the number. And there weren't options when they were released. There are no bail beds if you will, or housing. So for a lot of people who are detained, it doesn't take very long before they lose the housing they have. Obviously they're not working, they can't pay their rent, and so when they come out, that apartment or wherever they're living is gone. So there are a number of challenges. And we did see some very positive changes, again, that we were able to work with the last government to implement. Bail was expanded. There are some bail beds funded, which means that there are some options for some of these individuals that come out. Healthcare. This is an issue that I think it's very important to get an understanding about in terms of work that you might want to do inside or whether it's with people coming out. The first thing that I want to talk about is how healthcare is delivered in institutions, because we tend to think, based on our own experiences, that the Ministry of Health has responsibility for healthcare. They don't. It stops the door going inside. Healthcare inside of our provincial institutions is taken care of by the ministry. Previously, the Ministry of Community Safety and Correctional Services, that we now renamed Solicitor General, who really know nothing about healthcare. It's not their priority in terms of their ministry mandate. And you can imagine the sorts of issues that happen. So staff that they hire are not working for the Ministry of Health in one of their facilities, for example, hospitals, community clinics. They are literally employed by the provincial ministry. And so working conditions for them are very difficult. They're often on call, they're not hired at a level where they have any benefits, they're all part-time. So they're very marginalized employees, and the working conditions are obviously not ideal. Our fractured care report, which I'll show you quickly at the end, advocates for a merging of those responsibilities. And we've not had great success with that. The ministry has agreed to take a look at it, the Ministry of Health, but that's really as far as it's gone. And there are all kinds of implications from that split in the responsibility. And similarly in the federal system, I thought I had that in my slide here, but I'm going to get to that. You'll see very similar sorts of concerns. There we are. So same thing here, federal healthcare is the CSC's responsibility. So the provincial ministry has no responsibility for it. So there's very much a disconnect when that individual leaves the institution. There's no transfer of records. Both oversight ministries have very archaic paper-based systems, so they don't form part of or integrate into the individual's healthcare records that exist in the province under the Ministry of Health. I want to talk a little bit about the profile of prisoners in the federal system. What we're starting to see, and I think generally, we're seeing that crime is an aging phenomenon. So as our population ages, people sort of age out of crime generally. You'll find that most stats reflect crime activities are at a younger age. And so we see, similarly as we see in our community, populations are aging. And so prisoners, as they age, are experiencing the very same kinds of age-related illnesses that we experience in the community as we age. And so, again, having not the best healthcare solutions, they're dealing with issues that, and they're listed here, that we start to see. And as they leave the prisons, they're looking for the same kinds of supports that we look for as we age and can no longer stay in our homes. And those solutions don't exist. And of course, there's a compounded barrier of all of these individuals having prison and criminal records, which a lot of facilities are very, very cautious of in terms of bringing someone in, because they're thinking of, in a very inappropriate and perhaps prejudiced way, that everyone presents a risk to the community, and therefore everyone presents a risk to the populations in their facilities. So here's some stats that I think are really a good snapshot to take a look at who and the kinds of issues that are faced by our prisoners inside. So this gives you a sense of what healthcare looks like. So first of all, 32%, and this is a combined federal provincial stat. These are just general numbers. They have no access to primary health providers, which is higher than generally the number in the population in the community. 80% is the number around substance abuse, so you know that's a very common issue faced by individuals. And obviously you've been reading about the opioid crisis, both inside and outside in our community. So this is mirrored inside as well. Hep C rates are much higher than they are in the community. HIV, 7 to 10 times higher. Mental health, 2 to 3 times higher, and we're hearing more and more about that. And then again, we move into some of these conditions that are tied sometimes to the aging, the obesity rates, and again, leading to diabetes, heart conditions, and those sorts of things. So a very different picture in terms of health inside than it is in our general community. We've got an infographic that is here, and I would encourage you to have a peek on our website. I'll mention that at the end again. But if you want to have a look more closely at some of these things, those resources, we've got quite a library on there of some of the research that we've pulled together around some of these areas. And I think they're very helpful to look at. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on segregation. I expect some of you have been watching or seeing some of the media coverage around these issues because it's an issue both at the provincial and the federal level. There have been some court challenges. BCCLA, Civil Liberties in British Columbia, partnered with our national office around a challenge. The federal government has made some commitments to amend the CCRA and address that. Certainly, we are looking at, first of all, not using segregation for mental health issues. And we know that individuals with mental health problems really don't belong in the prison system, they belong in hospitals. But for those of you who have been around in this field for a while, you go back to a few years ago when we deinstitutionalized. And so those populations, when you watch that trajectory, really shifted inside the prisons. That became the mental health institutions of the 60s and the 70s. And so now if we try and reverse that, which we obviously are trying to do, maybe not so much reverse, the appropriate place is hospitals. And our hospitals are saying they can't house the people that need care outside in the community, let alone taking the mental health populations that would be moved back out from prisons. So it's quite a dilemma, and it's something we keep an eye on in terms of the announcements around healthcare cuts, because they're certainly problematic. Provincially, similarly, there are regulations. We do have some changes that were passed, they're not enforced. It's anyone's guess whether they will become enforced under the current provincial government. So again, they define segregation and set the rules around it. And one of the things to watch for in this is that there are segregation units, as many of you know, inside. What we're seeing happening, and suspect is happening, is that those segregation units perhaps aren't being used. Other facilities are being set up that aren't called segregation, but it's really the same thing. So while sometimes you hear people talk about the facility, we're talking about conditions of confinement. Segregation is segregation. It really doesn't matter where you put people. So just sort of be in tune to that as you start to read about some of the changes that are being proposed. I mentioned quickly the legal challenges. The Jean settlement in Ottawa, Christine Jean, was probably the one that received the most press. And there was an order that was ignored. So there were a number of changes that were ordered to be made, and it didn't happen. And so there was a consent order that happened later. It was revisited, and it was really around the end of segregation for mentally ill prisoners. And we know in reality it just can't happen at this point. There just isn't the change in facilities to manage that. There's been a fine. The federal government has been ordered around a $20 million payment around mentally ill prisoners being placed. There is a cap currently under the Ontario Court of Appeal at 15 days. But again, and perhaps the most telling case around those sorts of creative, if you will, solutions around these caps is Ashley Smith, who you know spent a number of years in segregation, but she was moved from facility to facility. So those clocks started ticking each time she was moved somewhere else. So when someone may only spend 15 days, and I know that wasn't the case necessarily with her, but that clock shuts off when they move. So then they're put in segregation again, it's a new time. So essentially, again, it's a fairly creative way, and it's really important to watch those. I think they're abuses, it's fair to say that. I talked a little bit about mental health, the changes from deinstitutionalization in terms of what we're seeing now. We know that our police are our first responders now in mental health crises, and they are receiving training, and I mean, I think it's a very difficult position to be put in. It's a really tough job, but they're being asked to intervene and make decisions around individuals really that have healthcare needs. Mental health is very clearly a healthcare issue. We exacerbate that in prisons, and again, there's a list there, but I talked a bit about segregation. Obviously, someone who has a mental health issue that's locked in a cell for essentially 22 or 23 hours a day or more is only going to have those conditions become exacerbated. Reintegration. So this is one of the areas that I suspect you will have an interest in, and I don't really know where the group is thinking that they may play a particular role. But this is where people are coming out of the institutions and coming back in. We know there's a real lack of discharge plans. So not many people see a discharge planner. They're released, the doors open, and they're out. And so that's a role that we try and play. A lot of our workers do go in, meet with individuals, and give them a hand in setting up housing, initial contacts with employers, perhaps Ontario Works help just to get them on their feet, some money to get some basic needs met right away, linking to a healthcare center, often addiction services, so all the supports that they really need to make a difference. And our research has shown, interestingly, that that the important window, if you will, of helping someone coming out of an institution is in that first day or so. So if you can have an intervention or supports in place when those doors open and they come out, you have a much better chance of success with them than if you wait and have an appointment 4 or 5 days down the road. Because at that point, the pressures of not having money, no place to sleep, it's very easy to fall back with old friends and old acquaintances and old patterns. And so we know that that's that critical window. So as you're thinking about supports, just sort of keep that in mind. It's important that you see them right away. Housing, I mentioned that. Obviously, that's a particular problem. There's issues around their criminal record. Even though it's protected under the Ontario Human Rights Code, the reality is that people don't understand what they need to disclose, and landlords don't understand their responsibilities under legislation. And there really is a bi-directional relationship. So we know that people who are homeless have a higher probability of ending up in jail in the criminal justice system. And we know people that are coming out of the criminal justice system have a much higher propensity to end up homeless. So it's very cyclical and very much a revolving door, for a lack of better words. Employment, we also know that's a key criminogenic factor in terms of someone being successful at reintegration, finding a job. And so, again, that sort of leads into some of our police record and criminal record concerns. Criminal records present a barrier that's known by everyone in terms of finding work. I think we're making headway. It's a protected area under the Human Rights Code if you have a pardon, or now what's called a record suspension. And we started to find, after hearing perhaps the more systemic issues from our local offices providing service, that the worst barrier was the police record. So people who were perhaps questioned by police were brought in but not charged. They may have been arrested but not charged. Those records stay in the police files. And there's 2 things that happen with them. When somebody applies for a vulnerable sector check, which is one of the levels, the most intrusive level of the police record check, police have the discretion to disclose all this and usually erred on the side of disclosing. So we had examples of people coming to us who, for example, someone who wanted to volunteer to go on field trips with their children in school. They had a police record from, perhaps when they were 18 or 19 years old, perhaps a drug investigation. That came up, and they were barred from participating as a volunteer in the school system. We had an individual who was in Ryerson and had taken a nursing program. He successfully went right through that program, and when it came to the point of applying for a placement and doing the clearance at the particular hospital, something came up from I believe he was 18 years old, and they barred him from the placement. He was not allowed to essentially finish his program and graduate. So when you think of the impact of a police record, it's a lifelong barrier, and it's a criminal record that stays with you forever, or could. We were very successful with the last government in presenting our research and having some changes made. Police records now, there is a very clear direction, if you want, to the police departments and what they should release in each record. It's not perfect, and where there is still significant problems is what we have traded with the border people at the U.S. borders. So those, I understand you may have more information about how that works from an armed forces perspective, but those records were open to each other. I don't know whether it was more in favor of one side or the other, but we allowed the U.S. immigration to have access to our records. And so whatever we have given them, we may close it in terms of what we do, and we may grant pardons or record suspensions, but none of those are recognized by, for example, U.S. immigration. So someone who may have a pardon can still be turned back at the border, and someone who has an occurrence that was recorded somewhere in the police files, even though now the police are changing how they report that, can still face being turned away. And I'll give you an example. I had a young woman call me from Alberta, and she had called our office in Alberta, who didn't really do a lot of work in this area, and they had known that we were doing the research around police records, and so they referred her to us. She had a mental health episode when she was in her very early 20s. Her parents were afraid for her life. They called the police. They didn't know what else to do. So the police came. She was taken into hospital, diagnosed, medicated, and really went on to make a very good recovery and went on with her life. She went to school, picked up a degree, she married, she had a young family, and had never been out of the country. So her husband surprised her at Christmas with a trip for the family to Florida. And so you can imagine where this came up. And the border people would not let her go through. So again, this is something that happened. This was a health issue that happened in her life, and this is something that's being carried with her now, essentially for her whole life. So very unfair. Now there are avenues of recourse to cross, and you can apply for, not that it matters if an I-92, it's a waiver of inadmissibility that you can apply for at the American immigration offices. It's a very difficult process, it's expensive, and it used to be that once you granted it, you had it. Now I understand, I'm told by several of the clients from our local offices, they only grant them for a very short period of sort of provisional time, and then you have to reapply. I mean, it's really very difficult. And again, I mean, the border doesn't need a reason to turn you away. And you know, some people may say, well, you don't have to cross the border, but you know, you think of the enjoyment of your life that something like this can have. So this has been an area of focus with ours. We are working now with the Human Rights Office here to try and build it into the Human Rights Code. It provides that protection by law. I think it's our only avenue to try and address this. And I'm hopeful that, and they're certainly very interested. The Commissioner understands this issue and has also received complaints herself around very similar stories. So hopefully this is an area you will have some success with. Community alternatives, I just want to mention this just in terms of an awareness. Again, I expect most people are aware. Both our levels of government offer community programming, which are seen as aftercare or alternatives to incarceration. Perhaps not federally, I should mention. That's not really a true alternative, but in terms of community programming. And so where we really are focusing or have been is on youth, trying to find alternatives so that they aren't processed through the criminal justice system. But with adults now, this will become a very real way to reduce costs for operating prisons. Community programs are much less expensive to operate and can still have the same sort of supports and controls, if you will, if that's what's needed for certain individuals. Obviously, we're not abolitionists. We understand that times there are needs for prisons, and there are people who really do pose a risk to the community and do need to be incarcerated. So, but there are an awful lot of people inside who are not violent and can be more safely managed in the community, and much more effectively, much cheaper in terms of our tax base. This is something I thought might be of interest to you. We have produced a guide around visiting inside, and this is the most visited, we'll post this on our website, this is the most visited part of our website. We have an incredible number of people that come and download this, so it's something we keep an eye on, we update it regularly, because people who want to go inside loved ones to visit someone, with the, particularly in the provincial system, with the building of the mega jails that are more regional and not local, people have long trips. You think of a young mom with family that she has to haul along to go and visit someone, and she gets to the institution, there's lockdown. And for anyone that is familiar with institutions, that's not an unusual phenomenon. So we try and provide assistance in terms of how to get around some of the things, how to check ahead, what to expect when they go inside, because that certainly is an issue. We're seeing less and less of face-to-face visits. Federally, I think that's happening perhaps more than provincially, but I'm not really sure how that's changing as well. I would encourage you to have a look at that. I talked a bit about the work we've been doing. These are our reports on those 4 areas that are available on our website, and I would encourage you to have a look at those if there's any particular area that intersects with the sort of work that you're doing. Structured care is really around our advocacy, if you will, for merging the systems. And that's not an answer to the problems inside, but it's the first step. Once we get those healthcare systems merged, then we can start to take a look at continuity of care and perhaps having not equal, but equitable, maybe is a better word, healthcare solutions inside and out, and a seamless transition coming out. Unlocking changes around the mental health issues that I talked about, reintegration, which may be of particular interest to you, and the invisible burden, which is the police record. And we've produced a number of guides to help employers in terms of applications for employment and interview questions that are really in contravention to the Human Rights Code. People continue to ask those inappropriate questions in interviews. Have you ever been to jail? I mean, that's against the law to ask that. So, and people really don't understand their responsibilities as employers in that. So we continue to work in those areas. And that's really it in a nutshell in terms of that snapshot. But I'm happy to answer questions, and maybe you want to wait until then.
Yeah, why don't we do that? But thank you for that incredible detail and important information. So John Pinellas?
Yeah, well, maybe setting up the PowerPoint, you can ask questions to Paula.
Okay, because
That's still fresh in your mind. You know, I'm staying the whole day, and she is not, so like, this is a good time for her to respond to your queries.
There are all questions.
Well, just, yeah, what, can you just tell us the website for the John Howard?
Oh, absolutely. It is, John Howard, one word, .on.ca. And we have a consolidated landing page for all of our offices, so you'll go to the one page, and you just have to make sure the ON is in there, or you'll get sent elsewhere in the country. And from there, you can either check local services, there's a local services drop-down, and go to any office in any area you want to do, and there's a research and policy section that will take you to the library with all of our research and reports. And there's also some links there to other resources that might be helpful to you as well. Okay, sure, please.
Oh, okay. So, good morning. Bonjour. Namaste. So, my name is John, and I work with Roche Italian at Wartworth Institution as a multi-faith prison